The child is so small in that chair, it almost makes the room look cruel. Knees pulled in, fingers twisted tight around a worn stuffed rabbit, shoulders drawn up like the air itself might hurt. Their eyes are red, swollen from too much crying, but when they finally look up, there is nothing uncertain in the way they find your face. The voice is soft, thin, barely loud enough to belong in a courtroom at all, and still, it cuts through the silence cleaner than a gunshot. That's him. Everything changes at once. The prosecutor stills. The jurors lean forward. Someone near the back exhales like they have just heard the missing piece fall into place. And then every gaze in the room turns toward you with the same terrible force, as if the words of a frightened child have reached out and physically moved the world in your direction. You have not even had time to react, not really, but already you understand the truth that settles over the room like a verdict long before one is spoken. From this moment on, the facts are no longer the most important thing here. Not the knife, not the fingerprints, not the DNA. Just fear, just memory. Just a child staring at your face and believing with all their heart that they have seen evil before. And sometimes, that is enough to bury a man alive. By the time the police finished piecing together the scene, the story was already unbearable. A robbery, maybe a home invasion, maybe something uglier, fast and violent enough to leave a body on the floor and another adult bleeding out before help could arrive. Sirens, broken glass, blood in places blood should never be, and in the middle of it all, one survivor too young to carry what they had seen. The child could not remember the license plate, could not remember which way the man ran, could not even describe the weapon with any certainty, but they remembered a face. That was the one thing that stayed. And when the photos came out, when the lineup began, they pointed straight at you. From that moment on, the entire system had what it wanted. One memory to build a case around, and one man to put inside it. They came for you fast. Too fast for the kind of crime they were talking about, too fast for the kind of certainty they claimed to have. 1 minute, your life still belonged to you, and the next there were hands on your wrists, a badge in your face, neighbors watching from behind curtains, as if they already knew what kind of man the police only now intended to tell you that you were. You kept saying the same thing because it was the truth, and because the truth was all you had. You told them they had the wrong person. You told them you had nothing to do with any robbery, any break-in, any murder. You told them you did not even know the family, did not know the victims, did not know the address that suddenly seemed to matter more than your own name. But every denial just bounced off the room and died there. Then they said the words that changed the temperature of everything. The child is sure. They sat you down and showed you the statement like it was a mirror you were supposed to recognize yourself in. The details were close enough to make your stomach turn. The jacket was almost the same color as one you owned. The height was close enough that no one would call it a real inconsistency. The voice was described as low, rough, male. There was mention of stubble, maybe a hat, maybe both. The kind of half-formed details that should have made the whole thing weaker. Except somehow they didn't. Somehow they made it feel worse. Because it was not exact enough to clear you, only accurate enough to trap you inside the outline of someone else's nightmare. And sitting there, hearing a crying child described as confident, frightened but certain, you understood the first real danger. This was no longer just a case against you. It was a story the world was already prepared to believe. Because when a child is trembling and still points with conviction, adults do not merely listen. They protect, they rally, they fill in the blanks. And now you are not just fighting an accusation. You are fighting one of the deepest instincts a society has, the need to believe a child who says they remember the face of the man who destroyed everything. Your lawyer explains the danger in a voice so calm it almost makes it worse. The prosecution does not need a mountain of evidence here. They do not need a clean forensic trail, a perfect timeline, or some cinematic confession waiting at the end of a fluorescent hallway. What they need is much smaller than that and far more powerful. They need the child. They need the jury to see one surviving witness, still carrying trauma in plain sight, and accept three ideas without resistance. This child was there. This child suffered, and this child has no reason to lie. Once those three pieces lock into place, everything else in the case begins to bend around them. A jacket that looks like yours stops being a weak coincidence and becomes corroboration. The fact that you were seen anywhere near the area stops being ordinary and becomes suspicious proximity. The holes in your alibi stop looking human and start sounding like consciousness of guilt. That is how it happens. Not with one overwhelming piece of proof, but with a story that turns every loose thread in the same direction until the whole room starts to feel as if the conclusion was inevitable from the start. You tell your lawyer what should be obvious. Children can be wrong. Memory can break under fear. Trauma can distort the face attached to a terrible night. But the warning comes back immediately. Be careful. Push too hard. Question too sharply. And the jury will not see you defending yourself. They will see you attacking a child who survived hell. And that is the cruel architecture of the case. You are still allowed to speak, but not all the way. Still allowed to fight, but never with your full weight. Because the moment your defense begins to threaten the child's credibility, it risks threatening the jury's sense of decency too. That is when the true shape of the trap becomes clear. You are not just being accused by a child, you are being accused by every adult in the room, who looks at that child and silently tells themselves the same thing: do not hurt them again. By the time the prosecutor stands, the case is no longer being framed as a puzzle of facts. It is being framed as a moral decision. Not in so many words, not openly, not in any way that could be objected to and sustained, but everyone in that courtroom can feel it happening. The state is no longer simply presenting evidence against a defendant. It is telling a story about a child who survived the worst night of their life, and the man they say took everything from them. And once the trial becomes that story, every detail begins serving emotion before it serves truth. The prosecutor knows exactly where the power is, not just in what the child says, but in how the child says it. The trembling voice, the pauses that seem too heavy for someone so young, the tears that arrive at just the moment the room has gone completely still. They never have to say, believe this child, because this child is young. They do something far more effective. They make disbelief feel cruel. They make doubt feel like abandonment. Little by little, they turn the courtroom into a place where questioning the memory of a traumatized child feels less like skepticism and more like betrayal. And while that emotional gravity takes over, the weaknesses in the case begin to sink quietly out of sight. The poor lighting at the scene, the brief glimpse the witness actually had, the way trauma can distort memory instead of preserving it, the suggestive techniques that may have shaped what the child came to believe. All of it is still there, still real, still dangerous to the prosecution, if anyone is willing to sit with it long enough. But almost no one is, because by then, feeling has already outrun reasoning. The verdict has not been spoken yet, but the balance of the room has shifted. Emotion has taken the lead before argument ever had the chance. When the child walks into the courtroom, the air changes so completely it feels almost staged, like the room itself has been waiting for this entrance. The murmurs die. Pens stop moving. Even the people who have spent days pretending to weigh facts now seem to lean towards something older and more instinctive than reason. No one is looking at you the same way anymore. Not as a defendant, not even as a man. They are looking at you as the figure a child has to overcome terror just to face. And in that shift, before a single new word is spoken, some part of you can already feel the floor giving way. The testimony comes out in fragments, broken pieces of a night too violent to remember cleanly. A scream, blood where blood should not be. A door, a shape in the dark, eyes, a face. The child is not telling a story so much as reliving flashes. And somehow that makes it more convincing, not less. The gaps do not weaken the moment, they deepen it. Because pain rarely arrives in neat order, and the prosecutor knows that. He lets the pauses breathe, lets the silence wrap itself around every trembling detail until the whole courtroom is hanging on the voice of someone too young to have learned how to perform grief, which makes every word feel untouchable. Then comes the question everyone has been walking toward. Do you see that person in this courtroom today? The child turns, looks straight at you, raises a hand. Yes, that single moment hurts in a way almost nothing else can. Not because you hate the child. You do not. That would be easier. Cleaner. Hatred would give you somewhere to place the pain. But the child is not cruel, not calculating, just terrified and certain and wrong. What destroys you is not the pointing finger. It is the knowledge that your entire life is being handed over to a memory that is shaking while it speaks. Your lawyer rises for cross-examination, and suddenly every question feels dangerous, too sharp, and the jury sees a grown man bullying a traumatized child. Too soft, and the identification stands there untouched, glowing with moral authority. Every step is a misstep waiting to happen. Every attempt to defend yourself risks making you look monstrous. And sitting there, hearing your future narrowed by a witness no one in the room is truly willing to doubt, you understand something that never leaves you afterward. Some trials are not decided by what is true. They are decided by who the room is willing to question and who it has already chosen to protect. The jury is gone for less time than you expected. Not long enough for doubt to have done real work. Not long enough for the weakness in the case to breathe. Just long enough for the machinery to complete what it had already started. When they file back in, no one needs to tell you what is coming. You can feel it in the way people avoid your eyes, in the solemn posture that passes for fairness, in the silence that no longer feels uncertain. Then the word lands. Guilty. After that, the rest comes almost clinically. 20 years, 2 words, 1 number, and a life stops sounding like a life and starts sounding like time to be served. Somewhere behind you, a member of the victim's family breaks down crying. Someone else whispers, justice, with the kind of relief people use when they need to believe pain has been given a proper ending. And that is the most horrifying part of all. Not the sentence itself, not even the steel certainty with which it is delivered. It is the fact that everyone in the room seems to feel that something righteous has just happened, but you are standing inside a different truth. You know a person is dead. You know a child has been scarred by something no one that young should ever survive. And now, by the force of that same tragedy, one more life is being buried alive. Yours. Not because the system was unsure, but because it was sure in exactly the wrong way. Prison teaches you very quickly that a sentence is not always the heaviest thing a person carries. Time becomes concrete after a while. It turns into routines, counts, metal, noise, the dull repetition of days that do not care who you were before they started swallowing you. But the thing that follows you into every silence is not the number of years. It is the face of that child, the exact way they looked at you when they pointed, not with hatred, not with revenge, not with the cold satisfaction of someone lying, just fear. Pure, overwhelming fear. And somehow that is worse. If the child had hated you, you could have hated them back. You could have built yourself a cleaner kind of anger, but there is no clean anger here. Only the unbearable fact that your life was erased by someone who never meant to destroy you. That is what makes the memory rot from the inside. Night after night, the courtroom comes back. You dream the testimony exactly as it happened, except sometimes it changes in the way nightmares do. Sometimes the child is older, taller, voice steadier, but still pointing at you, still certain, still dragging that same accusation across the years as if time itself has joined the prosecution. And somewhere inside those dreams, another fear begins taking shape, quieter and more dangerous than rage. You start forgetting your own face, not literally at first, but spiritually, privately, the version of yourself that existed before the trial begins to blur. Before long, it is no longer just the state calling you a monster. It is memory itself reorganizing around the accusation until the man you used to be feels less real than the one they made the world believe in. So no, prison does not only take your time. That would almost be simpler. What it begins to take, piece by piece, is your ability to remember who you were before someone else's terror turned into your identity. Years pass before the case catches the eye of someone willing to look at it without the original spell already cast over them. Maybe it is a lawyer with a habit of distrusting certainty. Maybe a reporter who has seen too many official stories fall apart under close light. Maybe an innocence project that knows how often a conviction can survive on confidence long after the evidence should have collapsed. Whoever it is, they do what almost no one did the first time. They go back to the beginning, not to the verdict, but to the interviews, the transcripts, the recordings, the small procedural moments everyone once treated as harmless because they were wrapped in the language of helping a child heal. And under that second look, the memory starts to fracture. The child was not always certain. In the earliest interview, there are hesitations around key identifying details, a pause where certainty later appears, features that are vague before they become sharp. The interviewer repeats confirming phrases again and again, the kind that sound supportive on the surface, but quietly teach a frightened mind which answers feel safe, which answers earn approval, which version of the memory adults want to hear. The lineup is not as clean as the jury was led to believe. It leans, it suggests, and worst of all, the child is praised for choosing the right suspect, as if memory were a test and not a wound. That is what makes this part so devastating. It does not turn the child into a liar. It turns the system into something more frightening than that. Because no one has to be wholly evil for a false memory to harden into testimony. No grand conspiracy is required. Only a few adults, convinced they are protecting a traumatized witness, gently shaping confusion into confidence until the child no longer knows where the original memory ends and the guided version begins. That is where justice starts to crack. Not because a child said the wrong thing, but because the very process meant to protect that child taught their memory what it was supposed to sound like. The most dangerous thing was never that a child could be wrong. It was that an entire system could teach that child's memory how to speak. By the time the witness from that night grows up, the case has already lived inside both of you for years. Maybe they are in their late teens now, maybe their early 20s, maybe older, old enough to understand that memory is not a recording, old enough to revisit the past without the adults around them translating it first. Sometimes it starts in therapy, sometimes with old transcripts, old footage, old case files opened in private after years of trying not to look. Sometimes it begins with something smaller and more haunting than that. A gap, a hesitation, A sickening realization that certain details feel vivid not because they were truly remembered, but because they were repeated so many times they settled into the mind like memory's counterfeit twin. And once that doubt enters, it does not stay small. They begin noticing the difference between what they saw and what they were later taught to say with confidence. The face they once believed they could never forget starts to feel unstable at the edges. Certain phrases in the interview sound less like their own voice and more like answers shaped under pressure they were too young to recognize. Eventually, after enough fear, guilt, and sleeplessness, they do the one thing no one in that courtroom ever imagined they might do. They reach out to a lawyer, to an investigator, maybe they sign a declaration, maybe they simply say the sentence that should have mattered years ago. I am not sure anymore. I do not know if I identified the right man. And that is what makes this part hurt more than the conviction itself. No one wins here. You have already lost your youth to a cage built from someone else's certainty. And the child who survived that night has grown into an adult carrying a different kind of sentence. The possibility that, without ever intending to, they helped destroy an innocent life. That is what makes this story cut deeper than an ordinary wrongful conviction case. It is not just about a system failing one person. It is about a single broken memory reaching across decades and leaving ruin on both sides of it. When the case is finally reopened, it does not explode all at once. It comes apart the way old structures do, first with a hairline fracture, then with a shift in weight, then suddenly with the awful realization that what once looked solid was only standing because no one had pushed on it hard enough. The evidence that used to sound decisive begins to lose its shape under real scrutiny. There is no strong physical evidence tying you to the crime. The timeline does not hold as cleanly as the jury was led to believe. The child's earliest statements are less stable than anyone admitted. The interview methods look wrong now, not in some abstract technical sense, but in a way that reveals how fragile the whole conviction always was. And if a new suspect surfaces, or new DNA, or an old confession, or forgotten files buried in storage, that the case does not merely weaken, it starts collapsing under the weight of everything it was allowed to ignore. But even then, the system rarely speaks in the language of guilt. The prosecutors who once stood in certainty may never say, "We were wrong." They do not often offer words that clean. Instead, they retreat into the safer vocabulary of institutions in light of new information based on developments unavailable at the time, as though your life was derailed by timing, not by failure, as though the problem was never that the truth had been shut out, only that it arrived late. But for you, none of this feels new. Not really. There is nothing new about the truth when you have been living inside it for years. This is not revelation. It is recognition. It is the same old reality, the one you spoke into deaf rooms, the one no one had use for when grief and fear were more persuasive than fact, finally being allowed through the courthouse doors. At last, the truth is not changing, it is simply being admitted. When the conviction is finally overturned, when the words vacated or exonerated are spoken aloud, people around you treat it like the ending they have been trained to expect. The prison gates open, papers are signed, cameras might wait outside, someone may even call it a triumph, as if freedom arriving late still knows how to resemble grace. You step out after years that no one can hand back, and the world looks almost offensively normal. The sky is still there, cars still move, strangers still pass without knowing how much of your life was taken in rooms where everyone thought they were doing something righteous. To them, this is the moment the story resolves. The innocent man walks free, the system corrects itself, closure in its favorite costume, But that is not what it feels like from inside your body. That's because freedom is not the same thing as relief. Not after this. Standing there, you do not know where to place the hatred, or whether hatred is even clean enough for what was done to you. Do you blame the child who pointed at you while drowning in fear? Do you blame the police who wanted certainty badly enough to shape it? The prosecutors who turned trauma into a narrative and called it proof? The jury who mistook emotion for moral clarity? Or do you blame the larger machine that treats feeling like evidence whenever feeling helps secure a conviction? The truth is that none of those answers make the weight any lighter. You are free, yes, but freedom does not arrive carrying your youth in its hands. It does not restore birthdays, funerals, lost years, or the private version of yourself that disappeared while the world called you something monstrous. Because when truth comes too late, it may open the door. It just does not give back the life that was lived on the other side of it. Years later, the story may find you again in some quieter, crueler form. A letter forwarded through an attorney, a message passed along by someone who does not know whether to call it an apology or a confession. Maybe you learn that the child from that courtroom is no longer a child at all, and that the certainty which once sent you away has hardened into something else inside them. Guilt, shame, a private kind of grief with nowhere clean to go. Maybe they try to say they are sorry. Maybe they cannot. Maybe there are no words large enough to carry what happened, no sentence that can cross all those years and make either of you feel less haunted by them. And maybe the strangest part is that you do not even know whether hearing it would heal anything. After a wound like that, even mercy can feel complicated. Because this was never a story with a real winner waiting at the end. You lost your freedom, your youth, and the shape of the life you were supposed to have. And the child who survived that night grew up under the weight of a different devastation. The possibility that what they believed with all their terrified heart may have helped destroy an innocent man. That is what makes this kind of wrongful conviction feel worse than a simple lie. A lie at least has a villain you can point to. This has something far more tragic. A frightened child telling the truth as they understood it, and an entire system so eager to protect that pain that it turned fear into proof. The worst wrongful conviction is not when someone knowingly invents a story. It is when a child says what they truly believe, and the system uses that fear to bury two lives at the same time.